It's difficult to imagine how Kemi Badenoch's leadership can be in further disarray, but I don't think it's helped by Priti Patel. Badenoch was once seen as a rising star of the Conservative Party. She's now found herself in an increasingly precarious position as her authority is openly challenged, not by opposition figures who just laugh at her, but not by media spin, but by her own most high-profile colleagues like Priti Patel. The latest clash over immigration exposes a fundamental truth. Badenoch is struggling to assert her leadership, and the party she leads is fractured under the weight of unresolved ideological battles, and Patel's defiant defence of sky-high immigration figures during her tenure as Home Secretary directly undercuts Badenoch's claim that the Conservatives got it wrong. The public dissonance is not just a policy dispute, it's a full-blown challenge to Badenoch's credibility. So Priti Patel was on a thing called the Sun's Never Mind the Ballots show, and she doubled down on her government's record dismissing the notion that the UK had thrown open the borders post-Brexit. She argued that the points-based system allowed for controlled migration based on economic needs, highlighting the influx of healthcare workers during the pandemic as a necessity, not a failing. This is, of course, the exact opposite of Badenoch's narrative that the Conservative Party failed to control immigration, and that she as leader is determined to correct past mistakes. This kind of contradiction would be problematic in any party, but it's especially damaging for Badenoch. She's positioned herself as the hard-line Conservative, the straight talker who will acknowledge the truth that past Conservative governments didn't deliver. But what use is such a declaration when a senior figure within her own shadow cabinet refuses to accept that premise? Leadership isn't simply about making statements, it's about commanding loyalty and instilling discipline. And Badenoch's response, a carefully worded but undeniably pointed slapdown of Patel, was an attempt to reassert control. In fact, all she really does is establish the gap between reality and rhetoric, the gap between what she says and what people do in her cabinet. Her spokesperson released a statement saying, while the last Conservative government may have tried to control numbers, they didn't deliver. We didn't deliver. The emphasis on we is perhaps notable, an attempt to project unity while simultaneously distancing herself from Patel's narrative. But it doesn't matter how much we you put on a paragraph. The whole thing stinks of ammonia. It's just caked in canker and cack. It's absurd. And Badenoch's problem is that Patel didn't just misstep, she actively defied the party line. There was we everywhere. And then in a humiliating twist, Patel was forced to issue a clarifying statement on social media, walking back her earlier comments and reaffirming her support for Badenoch's new direction, but the damage had already been done. When a leader has to rebuke a senior colleague publicly, it's a sign of internal disorder. And when that colleague has to issue a clarification rather than an apology, it's a sign of outright defiance. Badenoch's struggles are emblematic of a deeper crisis within the Conservative Party. Immigration has been a defining issue for decades, and it remains one of the most potent electoral battlegrounds. But Badenoch's approach, admitting past mistakes and proposing a hard cap on visas, risks alienating not just voters but also her own MPs. Her problem is twofold. Number one is the internal divide. There remains a significant faction within her party that still sees Brexit as a success in immigration control, despite record-high net migration figures. And Patel represents that faction, and her willingness to challenge Badenoch publicly suggests she is not alone in this belief. And secondly, there's the Farage factor. Farage and Reform UK have pounced on this debacle, framing it as proof that the Conservatives are proud of mass migration, and his ability to position himself as the true voice of hardline immigration control is only strengthened by the public contradictions within the Tory ranks. Now, my hunch is that Patel is positioning herself as a leadership challenger. She won't do it directly. She'll find a stalking horse and then she'll go in for the kill. And she'll present herself as the next Conservative Party leader. You know, you can't keep replacing leaders. So she's going to position herself to support Badenoch for as long as possible until she can be slotted in just before the next election. I think she's as foolish as Badenoch herself. it's Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And Badenoch's authority has been visibly weakened, and she's either got to double down, reassert discipline within the party, and swiftly move to enforce loyalty, or risk being seen as a leader who cannot control her own house. But if she now puts Patel on the back benches, Patel can speak openly. If she leaves Patel where she is, then she's silencing Patel as much as she possibly can, but the damage lingers. Voters see a party that cannot agree on one of its core electoral promises. Voters see a party led by somebody who is weak, who speaks tough, who acts weakly, who doesn't do the hard work, who doesn't look at the detail, who doesn't mug up what she's going to say beforehand, who is always forced onto the back foot because she isn't prepared. The question isn't just whether Badenoch can lead the Conservative Party into the next election, it's whether she can lead them through the next few months without further internal rebellion. Patel has signalled that internal rebellion is possible, that even if rebuked publicly, she can rebuke the rebuker. She doesn't have to apologise. She's too grand for that. She's one of the bigwigs. That's the problem of putting a bigwig on the front bench of either the government or the opposition. They have more power than the newly elected leader. Starmer doesn't have that problem, really, except possibly with Miliband and with Hilary Benn. But Badenoch is surrounded by that problem. Almost anybody she appoints to a senior position in the shadow cabinet has greater experience than she has. So as her party's own shadow foreign secretary has demonstrated, the greatest threat to her leader doesn't come from Labour, and it doesn't come from reform. It comes from within.